October 29, 1941. Winston Churchill returned to Harrow School, the place where, as a young boy, he had been bullied, beaten, and told he would never amount to anything. Now at 66, he was Prime Minister of Britain, leading the free world against Nazi tyranny. The students waited eagerly for a grand speech, notebooks ready, expecting wisdom that would fill pages. Churchill stood at the podium, cigar clenched between his teeth, and looked out at the sea of young faces. He spoke just 16 words: never give in, never give in, never, 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 nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in. Then he sat down. The room was silent. Some were confused, others began to understand. Because Winston Churchill hadn't just preached these words, he had lived them through decades of failure, humiliation, depression, and rejection. This wasn't a speech. It was the distilled essence of a life philosophy, forged in the fires of relentless adversity. Today you're going to discover the principles that allowed one man to turn a lifetime of defeats into humanity's greatest triumph. This is Churchill's philosophy of life, and it might just change yours. Let's start with a truth Churchill learned before most of us take our first breath. Failure is not the opposite of success. It's the foundation of it. Young Winston was a disaster. His father, Lord Randolph Churchill, one of Britain's rising political stars, looked at his son with barely concealed disgust. "You will be a failure," he told the boy. "You will disgrace the family name." At Harrow, Winston was placed in the lowest form, the class for boys who couldn't hack it. While other students studied Greek and Latin, Winston struggled with basic English. He failed the entrance exam to Sandhurst Military Academy twice. But here's where Churchill's philosophy began to take shape. Most people, when they fail, retreat. They make excuses. They give up. Churchill did the opposite. He studied the failure. He asked, "What can this teach me?" When he finally got into Sandhurst on his third attempt, he didn't just pass. He graduated 8 out of 150 cadets. Years later, as a young member of Parliament, Churchill switched political parties. The betrayal, they called it. His career should have been over. It wasn't. He rose to First Lord of the Admiralty by age 36. Then came Gallipoli, the catastrophic World War I campaign that killed over 100,000 Allied soldiers. Churchill was blamed, vilified, destroyed politically. He fell into what he called the black dog, crippling depression that would haunt him his entire life. Most men would have quit politics forever, retired in shame, but Churchill had a philosophy. Success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. He didn't just survive Gallipoli. He studied it, wrote about it, learned from it, and used those lessons 2 decades later when planning D-Day, the invasion that would help win World War II. Churchill spent the 1930s in what he called the wilderness years, out of power, out of favor, mocked in Parliament for warning about Hitler when everyone else wanted peace. Churchill the warmonger, they sneered. Churchill the drunk. Churchill the has-been. He was invited to fewer and fewer dinners. His books weren't selling. Money was tight. At 60 years old, he seemed finished. But he kept writing, kept speaking, kept warning, because Churchill understood something most people never learn. Your greatest victories often come disguised as your most humiliating defeats. Gallipoli taught him amphibious warfare. The wilderness years taught him to see what others refused to see. Depression taught him empathy and resilience. When Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, and Britain finally realized Churchill had been right all along, they came crawling back to the has-been. The failure they mocked became the leader they desperately needed. Churchill's first principle: never waste a failure. Mine it for wisdom. Here's Churchill's second principle, and it's one that modern society desperately needs to hear: imperfect action beats perfect inaction every single time. Churchill was many things, but perfect. Never. He drank too much, smoked too much. His sleep schedule was chaos. He worked until 3 a.m., slept till 8, took a 2-hour nap in the afternoon. He was rude, impatient. He fired off memos at all hours, demanding action immediately. His strategy wasn't always sound. His military decisions weren't always right. But Churchill had a philosophy that served him better than perfection ever could. Perfection is the enemy of progress. When France fell in 1940 and Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany, Churchill's cabinet wanted to wait, to plan, to analyze every option before making a move. Churchill said no. He ordered the attack on the French fleet at Mars el-Kebir, French ships that might fall into German hands. It was a terrible decision. Over 1,200 French sailors died. France was furious, but it sent an unmistakable message to the world. Britain would fight, imperfectly, messily, brutally, if necessary, but she would fight. That action convinced Roosevelt that Britain was serious. American aid started flowing. Churchill wrote over 50 books in his lifetime. Articles, histories, biographies, memoirs. Were they all masterpieces? No. But he didn't wait for the muse to strike. He wrote 1,000 words before breakfast, every single day, regardless of inspiration. Writing is an adventure, he said. To begin with, it is a toy and an amusement. Then it becomes a mistress. Then it becomes a master. Then it becomes a tyrant. But you must begin. That's the key. You must begin. How many people do you know with brilliant ideas who never start? Perfect plans that never launch? Dreams that die in the planning phase? Churchill's philosophy was simple. Start before you're ready. Adjust as you go. During the war, he made dozens of decisions every day, some wrong, some disastrous, but he made them. Because in leadership, in life, the greatest sin isn't making mistakes, it's paralysis, it's waiting for the perfect moment that never comes. Churchill had a rule: take action within 24 hours of learning about a problem. Not perfect action, just action. Near the end of his life, someone asked Churchill if he had any regrets. Only that I didn't drink more champagne, he joked. But then he grew serious. I regret nothing that I did, he said, only the things I failed to do. Churchill's second principle, bias toward action. Move forward, even if imperfectly. Now we come to Churchill's most powerful and most misunderstood philosophy. Life is meant to be lived with joy, especially in the darkest times. This wasn't toxic positivity. Churchill knew darkness intimately. The black dog of depression stalked him constantly. He once stood at the edge of a train platform and had to step back, terrified he might jump. He watched friends die, made decisions that sent young men to their deaths, carried the weight of millions on his shoulders. But Churchill made a conscious choice. He would not let darkness win. Every morning, even during the Blitz, he woke up and chose joy. Not because life was easy, but because joy was an act of defiance. Churchill painted not particularly well, but with absolute passion. Over 500 canvases in his lifetime. When I get to heaven, he joked, I mean to spend a considerable portion of my first 1,000,000 years in painting, and so get to the bottom of the subject. He laid bricks, built walls at his country estate, Chartwell, got his hands dirty. He collected tropical fish, fed them himself, found peace in their silent swimming. He drank champagne with breakfast, smoked 8-10 cigars a day, stayed in bed until noon working, surrounded by papers and secretaries. The establishment was scandalized. Undignified, they gasped. Churchill didn't care. I have taken more out of alcohol than alcohol has taken out of me, he quipped. Because here's what Churchill understood that most people miss. Discipline without joy leads to burnout. And in a long fight, and life is a long fight, you need fuel. During the darkest days of the war, when London was being bombed nightly, when defeat seemed certain, Churchill did something extraordinary. He threw parties, not because he was in denial, but because his people needed to see their leader unbroken. They needed permission to hope, to laugh, to live. He walked through bombed-out neighborhoods, tears streaming down his face, but always with that cigar, always with that defiant smile. Are we downhearted? He'd shout to families who'd lost everything. No, they roared back. Churchill once said, I am an optimist. It does not seem too much use being anything else. This wasn't naivety. It was strategy. Because pessimism is easy. Anyone can focus on what's wrong, what's failing, what's hopeless. Optimism, real optimism, not blind positivity, takes courage. It's looking at impossible odds and saying, yes, it's bad, but we're going to make it anyway. Churchill's doctor once asked him how he managed to stay so energetic in his 80s. Churchill replied, "I never stand when I can sit, and I never sit when I can lie down." Then he added, "But I also never miss an opportunity to enjoy life." That's the secret, not grinding yourself into dust, not sacrificing everything for some future happiness, but finding joy in the journey, in the small moments, in the fight itself. Churchill's third principle: joy is not a reward for surviving. It's the fuel that helps you survive. Winston Churchill died on January 24th, 1965, at age 90. He had outlived most of his critics, outlived Hitler, outlived the empire he tried to preserve, but his philosophy, forged through a lifetime of spectacular failures and hard-won triumphs, lives on. Let's bring it all together. Churchill's life philosophy in 3 principles. 1, embrace failure as fuel. Don't run from your defeats. Study them, mine them for wisdom. Your greatest victories are often born from your most humiliating losses. 2, action over perfection. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Start before you're ready. Adjust as you go. Imperfect action beats perfect inaction every time. 3, find joy in the struggle. Life is hard. It will break you if you let it. So don't let it paint, laugh, drink champagne, find small pleasures in dark times. Joy is not a luxury, it's survival. Churchill wasn't a saint, he wasn't perfect, he was a man who stuttered and was told he'd never be a great speaker. A man who failed exams and became one of history's greatest writers. A man who battled depression and became the embodiment of courage. He didn't succeed despite his flaws, he succeeded because he refused to let those flaws define him. You have those same choices every single day. So here's my question for you. What are you waiting for? What failure are you running from instead of learning from? What action are you delaying because it's not perfect yet? What joy are you postponing until someday? Churchill's life proves that it's never too late. He was 65 when he became Prime Minister, in his 70s when he won the war, in his 80s when he won the Nobel Prize. Your story isn't over. Never give in. Never give in. Never, never, never. Not because success is guaranteed, but because the fight itself is what makes us human. Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. If you're going through hell, keep going. Winston Churchill, now go, keep going.